when people work from home, there seems to be a trend towards people being more comfortable working from home and feeling that they are more productive. And 90% employees who were part of a survey that was done again by the Global Workplace Analytics were saying that for them, flexibility in their working arrangements contributes to their morale. So there's some form of a motivation. People are finding it more motivating and more encouraging, and more for them, their morale is higher when they have that flexibility of working from the office or working from home, and or working from wherever it is comfortable for them. To an extent that 67% said the loss of flexibility will make them think about looking for another job. So it is clear, these statistics, I just put them in there to show that it is clear that working from home is now the new normal. Working remotely, either it's from home or virtual teams are working together to achieve an end, is now the new normal. So we will be looking at this, looking at each and every pillar, starting off with the setting objectives and expectations, where we'll give you a few tips on when you're setting your objectives and expectations, what are some of the things you can think about to make sure that it is effective and it supports working from home. And then we'll also then get into holding the team together. How do you build your team? How do you grow your team together so that it's cohesive, despite that you are not working from the same space? And then on communication, we will look at what are some of the tools that you can use. Isla will take us through and show us some of the tools that you could use in terms of enhancing the communication, because working from home essentially, or working remotely essentially, means that your communication has to be highly improved. And then we'll look at developing employee capability. If you do all the steps right in managing your team as they work from home, setting your objectives, hold your team together, communicate, and you do not develop the employees that will be working remotely, then you still have the challenge of not meeting your objectives and not getting the outcomes that you are looking for. So it's important that we also look at developing employee capability. And then finally, we put in the employee role and ownership. And here we are looking at that the employee themselves, or the people who are the ones working remotely, they have a role to play in making this whole thing successful, in making remote management successful. So we will touch that as well. There is a lot more when we're researching this. There is a lot more on this topic, but these are the 5 principles that we thought we would just stick to and take a deep dive into each and every one of them. Now, to look at the first one, setting objectives and expectations. The first one that we have put in there is establish a purpose. And in this establish a purpose, we are looking at that. It's important that your whole team is aware of what is the overall team goals, what is the overall purpose of the department or the purpose of the team, why was it formed, so that in that awareness they can see that they are going to, whatever they do will make a contribution to a greater achievement than just what they do. So it's important that we focus on that in the beginning and make sure every team member has buy-in and understands what is it that we are supposed to be doing. And then the second thing there, which we have, is having your objectives quite smart, quite specific, so that your team members are very clear on what is expected of them. Each and every one of them very clear that this is what is in my plate, this is what I am supposed to be doing, and the expected outcomes or results are A, B, C, D. So it's very important that we have those set out very clearly. As a manager, you work with your team members and ensure that you agree on the specific ones. And talking about that, I actually want to put in the element of managing performance. I guess you could, in setting those clear objectives and expectations, this would help you to manage the performance remotely of your team members. And then you need to also work at agreeing weekly or monthly measurable deliverables. You know, with working remotely, the difference is that you do not see each other every day. You cannot be checking what is the employee doing. Are they sitting at their table working at this hour or at what hour? Things change. There's a flexibility which we talked about earlier on, which employees seem to actually embrace and find it raising their morale. So now is capitalizing on that flexibility and making sure that with the expectations that you have set, you have the measurable outcomes or milestones that you set, that by the end of the week, this is what we expect, or the end of the month, depending on the type of work. So you have those catch-up conversations, you have those performance conversations at those intervals, so that you are able to let the person have the liberty and the autonomy to do, and the empowerment actually to perform and do their work. And then you just check at intervals. The days of micromanaging and sitting behind and checking someone's computer all the time, I think they are of the past now, because really it's trusting your employees to be able to do their work. The last point which I had there is team self-monitoring and accountability. So it's, again, establishing accountability mechanisms. As I said, maybe milestones that you set, or maybe through your performance management system, making sure that the person can also monitor themselves to see that how far are they in terms of the objectives, in terms of the outcomes that they wanted to do, or the activities that they'd set themselves for that particular week. So having some form of a tracker or mechanisms that you can use to do that. I find this very, very, very useful. You know, as I was doing some research on this, Katie from the Global Workforce Statistics was saying she does a lot of counseling. She's the CEO of that company. So in the counseling and working with business leaders, one of the questions which came up was, so what do we do if people are working remotely? How do we continually know that they are working? And their answer was, how do you know they are working when they're in the office? Because some people can open their laptops and you assume they are working when they are not quite working. So really, it's an issue of building a expectation, creating expectations, or creating objectives and setting expectations which have clear deliverables and clear outcomes, and then trusting your employees that they will be able to deliver and do the work when they should do it and deliver at this expected time, timelines that you have set. Isla, do you want to take us through more on setting objectives and expectations?
Sure, thank you. So as we go through, we'll hear principles against those 5 pillars, and then 1 or 2 practical tips or tools that will help you to achieve those. And so the first one of these that we want to share against that principle of setting objectives and expectations is simply a form of agenda to help you have really clear outcomes and outputs for your meetings. So this is the IPO, Input Process Output Agenda format. And the benefit is that it starts with outputs in mind. So when creating this agenda, when thinking about the expectation setting that you want to do with your colleagues, with your team members, start with your outputs in mind for those discussions. What do you require from that conversation? Is it a decision? Is it a plan? Is it having set objectives? Is it having reviewed progress? You need a really clear output that will be the result of that time spent with that colleague. Working backwards 1 step, think about your process. How are you going to get to that output? So if the conversation is, for example, a team planning session, and that's what you want to achieve, probably you're going to need an interactive discussion. You may need to have brought along certain templates or resources or the previous plan to that meeting. but your process will be that interactive creating of the plan. If you want to update your team members on a new thing, for example, a new approach to performance management, it may be more of a presentation style process. But whatever your process is to get to that output is worth outlining in your agenda. And that's because it helps you to prepare as a team leader, but it also helps your team members come prepared to give the types of contributions that you need from them in that conversation. Taking one step back again then to inputs, think about what would be useful. If you need your team to have reviewed data or certain reports in advance in order to be able to follow the process to reach the outputs, make sure they know about that ahead of time. And always worth sharing this IPO agenda ahead. It does help everybody to know what they can expect from that meeting, and thinking about the types of contexts that we might be dealing with. So, you know, as humanitarians, lots of colleagues will be working to very tight timelines. You might have to make decisions very quickly. Or as team leaders and capacity builders, we might sometimes be having quite difficult conversations, and having a really clear approach with very specific outputs and starting with those in mind, working backwards to how you'll get to them, and then once again to what you need to do that, is a really helpful and structured approach for setting objectives and expectations. Sipiwe.
Thanks so much, Isla. Now we want to move on to the second pillar, which is talking about holding the team together. So how do we hold our team together in the light of these rapid changes and working remotely? One of the key things which I've realized is that when you work remotely, there are different contexts that you'll have. You'll find some people working, you have people working in different time zones. We have people working in different environments and contexts. So it's important that you then take all that into consideration and discuss your ways of working as a team. Agree on how you will be working as a team and how you will set up your meetings or set up your discussions at times that will work for all of you despite the different time zones. I actually have an example because I work with people from West Africa as well as people from the Asia regions. So the time zones can be so different. So what we do is we make sure we set up our meetings at a time. The time is actually, if all of us are meeting together, it's actually a small window where it's comfortable for all of us. But when it's meetings with West Africa, then I align them accordingly. And with Asia alone, I align them accordingly. So it's very important to have that in your mind and agree on those ways of working. And then also in terms of agreeing on the ways of working, it's important to be clear on when are the expected timelines of when you will be contacting each other and when you will be talking as a team, because it's important that as a team you continue to have that that bondage, that time of being together. So you need to agree when are the timelines that you will be doing that, and who will be doing what during those meetings or those times that you are meeting. Having said that, all of it would not work. I mean, working remotely will not work at all if you have not built a culture of trust in the team. If you do not trust each other as a manager, you need to be able to trust that your employees are capable of delivering what they've been set to do. They are willing to deliver and will deliver, as well as the teams, your team members being able to trust you as a manager to support them and to work with them and to have that relationship of trust. And really in that, it means a lot of times to build trust, you really need to have some form of a relationship with your team members and create that time to talk. Isla will speak a little bit more about creating those relationships later. And then it's also important that you create opportunities to work either in pairs or work in small groups, despite that you might have, even if it's a big team. You create those opportunities so that people can continue to connect, because connecting is very key in keeping your team glued together and working together and having the same outlook and mindset. And then create opportunities for brainstorming as well. So if there are new innovations that you are working on or new ideas which you want to bring on the table, to create opportunities where you brainstorm using various tools for brainstorming, but in that, it continues to build the bond between the team and also gives you the desired outcome of a well thought out idea at the end of the day. And create a common language where the way you talk and the way you do things. You know, there are some teams which use acronyms. I don't like acronyms personally because I get lost. But in some teams, people can have a way of speaking that they understand each other very clearly. If they give a certain sign or a certain word, it is clearly understood. So in your team, have a language that you all understand, and everybody is on the loop on what you are discussing. And then the point on recognition and celebrating successes, really, it is very important at this stage when you are working with a team remotely to be constantly thinking about acknowledging outcomes, acknowledging successes of each and every team member. When a member does something that maybe meets a deadline ahead of time or gets a breakthrough in a piece of work that they are doing, to acknowledge that not only to the member, but to acknowledge it in the team, and if possible, even acknowledge it within the organization that you are working in, so that people feel that, oh, okay, what I'm doing is acknowledged and is recognized and is contributing to the total output of the organization. And in this acknowledgement, I think I also want to emphasize that to hold the team together is you don't only acknowledge, you also give feedback. If things are not going well, still give the feedback to the team members so that they understand what is it they're supposed to do, what is it that they were not supposed to do, so that there is an open communication and they are able to get to feel that they are on the right track because you are speaking to them constantly, making daily, weekly calls and ensuring that their voice is heard in all meetings and that their voice, it counts. So when you are holding those meetings, make sure that they're also in the end hearing. I think one last point I wanted to just say on holding the team together before I pass on to Isla is that it's important that your team knows what is going on in the greater organization. So sharing with the team, yes, what's going on within your team, but also what are some of the successes happening in the bigger organization? What is the new direction, new initiatives that are coming up in the organization, so that they continue to feel connected, despite that they are not, they're all not in the same place. So that connection is very key. Isla, do you want to take us through building on to that?
Yes, this is just a quick note really that we wanted to share about acknowledging some of that informal side of holding the team together as well. So important, of course, to continue all of the kind of more formal aspects of working together, but building on some of those tips that Sipiwe has shared, think about how you can create that interactivity that you're used to when you're working in the same place or seeing each other more regularly. So, you know, there are lots of ways to do that. What has worked for some teams are some of the tips that I'll just share very briefly now. So one is just about thinking about the possibilities that you have with whatever technology you're using. So if you use a platform like Teams or Skype, you have the ability to use instant messenger rather than emails. You might be able to share photos or emojis just to create a bit more of a sense of conversation, because your team might be missing out on that. It can also help you to then respond to things a little bit more live and a bit more quickly. Another idea is to try a coffee catch-up. So rather than having a formal meeting where you're looking at, for instance, you know, the formal side of your teamwork, your performance, or what's happening in terms of the work, a coffee catch-up can be a really good opportunity just to speak about things outside of the day job and the forthcoming deadlines. When you are used to working as a team and you see each other more regularly, you get that opportunity to discuss what's going to happen at the weekend or what else is happening. So a quick coffee meeting, half an hour, where you don't talk about work, but you do create some interactivity in the team, once a month or once a week, depending on what works for you, can be a really good way to do that. And then the final tool that I wanted to share is about team states. And this is an opportunity to ask your team regularly how they're doing. And that can include work-related effects, but also outside of work. In my team, for instance, every week in our team meeting, we rate how we're feeling from 1 to 5. And if somebody is a 5, that's fantastic. We can celebrate that they're having such a good week, find out why. If somebody's down at a 1 or a 2, that indicates that we need to take some action as a team. How can we support them? Is it something that's happening at work? Do they need some help at work? Is it something outside of work? And it can just help with some of that well-being aspect that some colleagues will be missing out on if they're a bit more isolated or not having so many opportunities to meet with the team. And all of this can be done by you know, Teams or Zoom or whatever platform you use, but also just over the phone, by text message, whatever works for your team. Sipi, right back to you.
Thanks, Isla. That's so true what you're just sharing, actually, because I'm thinking about the coffee breaks that you're talking about, the online coffees, that they are so keen making people still feel connected and building the relationship amongst the team members. Yeah. So moving on, but to talking about communication and collaboration as the third pillar that we had. I'll start off with the Harvard Business Review statistics, which said that 46% of successful managers check in frequently with their remote workers. And this emphasizing the need for an open communication, an open channel of communication between yourself and your workers and your remote workers. So it is very key that there is that communication. Isla already touched on that. There are many platforms that you can set up or agree to communicate on, but the key point is that you agree that these are the communication platforms that you'll use, and ensure that you enable everybody to be on those platforms and able to use those platforms. Yeah. And then in that communication as well, I just wanted to emphasize 2-3 tips, which is before I hand on to Isla to talk a little bit more on it, is that when you do the calls, you know, it's important that if you are working with a remote team, you get to see each other. So it's important that you when you're doing the calls, you do video calls so that you see each other's faces and expressions, and just as a connection point that you use the videos when you are doing the calls. And also where you have agreed certain, let's say you set up certain instructions, or you have agreed certain tasks to be done in your discussion, it's important that there is a follow-up, a written follow-up. Something is written which states what we are going to be doing. And in that way, it helps that there is clarity on everyone's side on what is expected out of them, because you would have written out what you agreed, although you would have discussed it and agreed verbally on the calls. I think these are the 2 points I will touch, because Isla, I think, will get into a little bit more on this area of communication. Isla?
Thank you. Yeah, our main tip here really is to keep things visual if you can. And that is because we have to recognize that while some of our colleagues may be really well set up, they may have decent connection, they may have a good screen that they can use. A lot of colleagues will be working with very small screens, maybe relying primarily on a phone to look at emails and so on. Or may not have a very reliable internet connection. So to make our work accessible to everybody, we should think about where we can reduce the number of words, the number of documents that we're sharing, and focus on more visual prompts. Lots of you will be used to doing this anyway in your own reporting and monitoring, but something as simple as a RAG rating, which is red, amber, green, red being action is needed, we're off track, green being everything's on track, we'll carry on, is a really great way to signal very easily, very quickly at a glance, how are we doing as a team, what needs attention. Similarly, taking color coding as an approach to accountability boards and monitoring what activities are happening can be very useful to see, again, at a glance, who in the team needs support, which of our activities is falling behind or experiencing challenges. So for instance, if you have a small number of really crucial goals that you're working to meet, helping color code your activities to that, or marking out who is working on what can be a great way to help the team keep track despite varying levels of kind of accessibility. And I've just noted a few different platforms over on the right. Depending on what you already use in your organization and what your data protection and compliance rules are, you will have different approaches to this, but some options of free tools that are out there to support your collaboration as a team are on the right. So things like Miro and Mural are really great to replace the kind of brainstorming and creative work that you might otherwise have had the opportunity to do in person. Something like Microsoft Planner can be a great tool for keeping track of what's happening, getting a sense of who in the team might need support. And Menti is really good for looking at polls, votes, getting feedback from your team. So various free options that run online and are reasonably accessible. Thanks, Sipiwe.
Thanks so much, Isla. I think we'll take a pause here. Sheila?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, I think what we'll do is just address two questions at this point, and then we'll address the others as we go. So the first question was around the data that you presented, Sipiwe, and the question is around whether that data is specific to the humanitarian sector or whether it's general in terms of the number of people working from home or working remotely.
Okay. Thanks, Sheila. The data that I shared was actually quite general of people working remotely. When I did look earlier on, I think it's a few months ago, I did some research on data for the humanitarian sector. I was looking at just a couple of organizations, a few organizations that relate to, which are similar to ours. I work for Save the Children. And the statistics were actually higher than what I just shared there, because there I was looking at the global workforce. So they were slightly higher, where you had, there was at a point where we had 80% of all of humanitarian workers working remotely at the peak of the corona time. And then at some point, the steady statistics that kept coming up were around 60%. But generally, they are slightly higher than the ones that I shared.
Thanks, Sipiwe. And then really quickly, there's a question or some questions around productivity. I think the data showed that 13% more productivity was sort of common across the board. So just one or 2 points as to why that's the case, and then maybe we can go back to the slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. On that increased productivity from working remotely, from the research, it looks like it's a lot to do with the flexibility to work when you are at your prime. You know, all of us have got different times when we are at our peak in a day. And because there is that flexibility now, people who work remotely tend to work at a time when they are at their peak. It might be an inconvenient hour for someone, but for them that is the best time. And then also all the anxieties which go with commuting to the office, which go with thinking about, oh, I have to think about the children. For those who have children, I have to look at balancing my whole life. That sort of tends to settle a little bit, because you are now you've got the whole 24 hours and you're able to work around that 24 hours, so that you know that the best time for you to put in pieces of work, big chunks of work that you need to prioritize at this time and this time. So the studies were showing that is increasing the morale and the motivation of people, so that they're able to focus. And also there is that commitment where you are not looking at just making your hours 8 to 5. You are now looking at deliverables. I have to finish this and my target date is this. So because of that expectation to meet your deliverables, there is a commitment and an edge to work to meet the deliverable more than looking at the clock. So that is why they were saying you are likely to even work more hours than the normal working hours per week. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Sipiwe. I think we can move on now. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're moving on to discussing the fourth pillar, which was talking about developing employee capability. So in this pillar, we've put coaching there as the overall, and you will find that at the end of this presentation, we've actually shared some materials or some links to materials that you can get in, and courses that you can do on the Kaya platform.
I think we may have lost Sipiwe for a few minutes. She's back. Sipiwe, you're back. You had disappeared.
Oh,
welcome back.
I was talking to myself. Sorry. Yeah. So I don't know where I left off.
The tools. I think you were talking about tools.
Oh, okay. I guess I probably was referring to that. There are links that we are sharing on coaching, and links to the Kaya platform where you can do courses. So we will share that at the end of the session. But if an employee is to work from home or remotely, we need to ensure that they're comfortable and they're capable, they feel confident that they're able to deliver. And we need to ensure that we work with them to keep them motivated and in that they have the requisite knowledge, the requisite skills that they need. And in some cases, it might require a reskilling, because if one was used to working in a particular environment in the office and now they are working remotely, you might need to reskill or you might need to upskill. And I'll give an example of our office where a lot of people had to go and work from home when they were used to working from the office. And we had to agree on which platforms we are going to be using, communication platforms, and also like shared SharePoints and shared boards where we would do collaborative work together. So a lot of team members had to upskill themselves to get confident in how to use these tools and get comfortable with them. So there might be a bit of reskilling, a bit of upskilling, and then just general support, making sure that you are supporting your staff member. We talked about the open channels, and those open channels of communication could also include giving advice where it's required, sharing documents, sending them documents to enable them to work on the pieces of work that they are working on, and working on just upskilling, increasing their knowledge and their understanding on the various topics or the projects that they are working on. So it's very important that we focus on that for remote working to work and for remote management to work. And this would help, I put in a point there that it would help in improving decision making. You don't want your staff member working from wherever they're working from to constantly be phoning you to make every little decision on the work that they're doing. You can have agreed, major direction changes to the task that they're doing that they can fall back to you. But on their day-to-day work that they need to do, they need to be able to be empowered to make the decision. They need to be empowered to problem solve when there are challenges, that they're able to navigate those challenges and come up with solutions themselves. And that is what here we are focusing on when we are saying we build employee capability. There are other ways of doing this, of course. There is also the mentoring. There is also ensuring that they have they do online courses themselves, and encourage them to take on self-development through online programs, like the Kaya platform has got quite a lot of those, and just give them that responsibility, but also support them to ensure that they have the capability to do this, the work that they are meant to do. I will pass on to Isla, who talked to us about how, here I'm talking a lot about the individual development, but really it's individual and team development. So Isla, do you want to give a few tips on that as well?
Thank you. Yeah, it's worth thinking as you're working as a team, how can you bring in some of those development points into that work and become a more collaborative team with joint ownership? So just a couple of quick tips here. And again, there are other ways to do this. If you have come across useful things, please do type them in the chat box. Polls and voting can be a really good way to gauge understanding and get feedback from your team. If you're trying to introduce new things, if you're moving at a fast pace, then asking everybody how they've understood or whether they're comfortable is one thing, but things like voting can be a way to get a bit more feedback and a bit more honesty from your team if you do that anonymously. And you can also help them to expose any gaps that are there. If you find that understanding is lacking, that's likely to be an issue later. So address that up front. And there are various tools you can use for this. So SurveyMonkey can be used for free. Menti, as I mentioned earlier, is a free platform that you can use. And if you use platforms like Teams, there are functions that you can use within that to run polls. So lots of options. You can also just do that by text or verbally over the phone by giving numbers. They're not anonymously in that case. FIST or 5, we saw at the beginning of this session. This is a great tool for decision making and a really good way to involve your whole team in a decision. And the benefit of this over just asking them if they agree or disagree is that you get a sense of the level of their agreement or of their understanding or of their confidence. And this can help you to remove any obstacles rather at the start rather than later. So if you have a team that is all around a 3 in terms of their agreement for a direction forward, then maybe something that you can do, ask them, what do they need to get to 5? It may simply be that a bit more information or a slight change will help them to really get behind the direction that you're setting as a team leader and for you to support them in the right way. So worth trying out that tool with your teams, particularly for decision making, but also for confidence or understanding. And then finally, in some cases, it might be appropriate for team members to share with one another what their development areas are. Thinking about team development, there might be options for one peer to support another and for some of that support to be shared within the team. It can also be a really nice way for building a culture of feedback and providing that development support to one another. So by sharing those development areas, you can open up more opportunities for that individual to be able to develop with the help of their whole team. Sipiwe.
I like that point about sharing opportunities amongst the team members so that they help each other to develop each other and to support each other in the development. The other point I just wanted to add onto that is that it's important to also to track the development so that you agree with each team member what is their areas, the gaps that Isla was referring to, and then have a way of tracking it and keeping a record of those training opportunities, because that tends to also build team morale. It also tends to build individual morale of your team members. So moving on to the last pillar. Yeah, moving on to the last pillar, which is role ownership and accountability. Here, really, we are taking the focus. Yes, we are focusing on the managers. How do you manage your teams remotely? But we are also saying there is a role to play as an employee. That as an employee who's a team member who's working remotely, you need there is a role that you can play to own your position, to own the work that you do, and be fully accountable for what is on your table and what you are working on. And one of the key ways of doing that is making sure that you've got the resources that you need to be able to deliver effectively. by resources, I'm talking about you've got the internet connections, because that is key. Without the internet connections, wherever you are, it will be quite a challenge for you to work remotely. And in some places where we work, especially in the humanitarian sector, it can be very difficult to have good connection. An example I can give is that as I'm talking to you, I'm actually tethering on an external device. I've got my phone ready to tether in case the internet gives drops at any point. So it's just you get all your materials ready and are able to do your work without any challenges. And it's also important that if you need support, let's say there is a challenge in terms of the materials you need, the equipment and resources, to feel free to have that communication with your manager to indicate that there is this challenge. Can you get some support? And from the manager's perspective, if you are managing a team remotely, is to constantly check with your team members to see if their equipment is okay and they're able to work effectively with you. In some cases, I've seen some organizations which have decided to moving into the new normal and working remotely. They decided that they would actually use some of the equipment that they were using in the offices and offer staff to use that equipment in their homes so that they can effectively work remotely. So those are some of the things that tips that we can share what other organizations are doing. And then as an individual also to encourage your employees that they need to be fully engaged in discussions and in meetings, and make sure that they post their work. If you've got a shared platform where they can post, then they can post the work that they're doing. They can post like share articles of what's going on in your sphere of work. For instance, I work in learning and talent development. So in our team, we do when I find something interesting which has come up from maybe the Harvard Business Review, I will share with the team members that this is, oh, did you see this article? And my colleagues do the same. That it keeps the team working together and fluid and feeling that you are still a team working to achieve the same goal. And then support team members in their own projects. Volunteer to step in and work with a team member on what they are doing. In that way, you are in the loop of what they are doing. At the same time, you still are giving them support to effectively deliver. And then I put these 2 points about being solution driven. When you work remotely, as I said earlier, it's very important that you problem solve, you learn to problem solve. That's an important skill to have. So when you raise issues or challenges, that you are able to also raise the solutions to those challenges as our environment in the humanitarian sector specifically continues to get more complex and ambiguous. So look for solutions, look for innovations, and continue to be self-driven and self-motivated, because working from home to a large extent, really the motivation should be internal. It's a lot more internal than external. So managers can support as much as they can to raise your motivation and your morale, but it has also got to be self-driven. So it's to have these discussions with your employees. There's just one point I wanted to share about, I think Isla touched it just before I got to the conclusion. Isla touched on the point of that a lot of times people working remotely, people can feel lonely and disconnected. That a lot of times there's an assumption that introverts are now happier because now they are working remotely and in their own spaces. But again, it might actually create more challenges for them to speak out when they have, let's say they have a resources challenge, or they have connectivity challenges, or they have challenges with the particular project they are working on. It might create more challenges for them because they would now be at that distance which has been set by being removed, can cause that challenge for them. So it's important that as a manager you're aware of it, and then you have those discussions with your staff so that they are self-aware and they take ownership of, how do I resolve this? How do I move forward? Isla, you want to take us through with this?
Yeah, final practical tip of the webinar is the after action review. And we've had lots of really great thought-provoking questions and comments in the chat box and through the Q&A, which really highlight that this is certainly not a thing that we have completely got right yet. Lots of us are still working out how do we do remote working and particularly remote management really, really well. And I think a big part of how we work through that, how we start to get the right balance between different aspects, how we work most effectively for our teams, is by sharing accountability for continuous improvement. And the after action review is an incredibly easy structure. It's just a quick tool where you ask what went well and what could be improved. You can ask this after each team meeting. And it doesn't have to be a big kind of 3-hour meeting with 20 people. This is something you can use when it's just 2 of you, when it's 5 of you. It can be for your formal meetings. It can be for your one-to-ones with individual team members. It can be for ad hoc work that you could do, or you could just use the after action review approach to ask your team, how are we doing with remote working? Or how is my remote management? What went well and what could be improved? And by doing this, by demonstrating yourself that you're willing to hear that feedback, that you recognize that continuous improvement is key, you can build that shared ownership across the whole team for everybody to take responsibility for continuously improving remote working, and as a team really achieve great remote management and great remote working. Thank you.
Thanks, Isla. So just to do a summary of what we've covered today, this is, I think it's more or less my final slide, our final slide. We've looked at setting objectives and expectations as one of the key things. And then we looked at how do you hold your team together? We looked at communication and what the role it plays in ensuring that remote management works well. And then developing your employees and your team. And finally, we looked at the employee role and ownership. Just to say, what underpins all this working remotely and successfully doing it, managing remotely successfully, is trust. Steve Harvey says trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. And it's the foundational principle that holds all relationships. What we found in almost all the research I went through was that without trust, the team will not achieve its outcomes. The team will not be a successful team because there will be no relationship in that team, and there will be no trust. There will be no loyalty in that team, and basically, we need to make sure that we build trust in our teams. I think I will stop there and ask for questions.
Thanks, Sipiwe. We are 2 minutes to time. One of the questions that has come up quite a lot is that around trust. Exactly how do we build trust? And I think you've touched on that on some of the presentation. But if you could give us some quick tips on how we can increase that trust, that would really be helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the key things which I had in mind was integrity. As the manager, if you are a person of your word, if you role model what you say, and you are a person who people feel that what you say is what you mean and is what you will do, that already starts to help in terms of your relationship with your team members. Then there are other things. There are other things that you can look at as well. Reliability. Are you a reliable person? So in your team, you can actually do team building exercises where you are looking at how do you work together and how do you get to understand each other. And some of the things which help with that is also getting self-awareness exercises too, so that everybody understands themselves and gets to understand how others work. And all these tools are available. Some of them actually are free online tools where teams can work with those. And yeah, and also being very open with feedback. If something didn't go well, be truthful and state that it did not go well. And if something went well, being open again and being transparent and very truthful, and handling disagreements and conflict in a way that is, again, transparent and open in the team. I think those are the tips that come to my mind off the cuff at the moment.
Thank you so much, Sipiwe. So what we're going to do, as has been mentioned, a lot of questions have come up in the chat, and colleagues have answered them. Thank you very much for that. We will now move on to a very quick poll to see whether you're feeling any more confident now, having gone through this webinar. So if you could please just put in your score very quickly before you leave, that would be great. I can already see the confidence bar has gone up quite a bit, headed much higher, over 50%, which is absolutely amazing. So I will end the poll, and as you can see, definitely that has gone up. Thank you so much for that. Very quickly now, also the resources which you'll be able to access from Kaya. These slides are going to be available to you on the website where you registered for this webinar. So these resources also are available to you. Please have a look and see so you can get more details on coaching, for example, on remote working, etc. So do take advantage and go in and have a look. And as usual, continue to communicate with us. And all our different ways of communication are coming up on the screens shortly. So do continue communicating with us. It was very pleasurable having you in this webinar. I'm just going to put in a link for a quick survey. Would love to hear from you, especially in terms of topics that you'd like covered in future. So I've put in a survey link in the chat. If you're able to fill in that survey, we'll really appreciate. I will really appreciate it. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to having you at the next HLA webinar. Bye-bye, and have a good afternoon, day, night, depending on where you are. Thanks once again.
Thank you very much for listening to us, Isla and I.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.